Welcome to the Relationship Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and each episode I'll be speaking to a different state of mind expert on the subject of relationships. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 30 of the Relationship Series. This week I'm joined by Kara Stamback. Kara is a partner in an organisation called Pransky and Associates, and they've been doing some pioneering work around relationships. Kara's got a special interest in personal relationships, which we'll be talking about today. And the organisation she's been working for, which is a family organisation, and I've got her sister and father on previous episodes, as you may have realised, is just started an online division and doing some great work in that area too. So welcome, Kara.
Thank you very much, Ankush. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the episode. And on the series. So as we get started, as I do kind of with all of my guests, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story. I mean, we've heard from, like just mentioned, your dad, George Pransky, and your sister, Erica, but I'd love to hear your story in your words. Kind of how did you, apart from growing up with the father you did, but what was your story about getting involved in this understanding and this work, and then I'm guessing choosing to enter the family business, as I guess it wasn't a defined path per se. It was something that you chose.
Yeah, it was something that I chose, and you know, I it's funny because I certainly was born into this, and you know, when I was I think around 8 is when George and Linda first learned about this, and they were just it was very organic. They saw something for themselves. It improved their relationship. It changed our family dynamic, but it just sort of happened organically, and I just kind of stepped into it. And here I was living in a household that, you know, was happy and high functioning, and you know, and that was just kind of normal for me. And so as I grew up, there were, you know how when you're a kid, there's certain points at which you think to yourself, okay, well, what do I want to do with my life? You know, what do I want to be when I grow up? You know, as a kid, you think that. And so I had thoughts like that. And one of the thoughts, just like with any kid, was, well, maybe I should do what my parents do. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. And then the older I got and the more seriously I considered that, every time I looked at that possibility of doing the work that they did and going into psychology, which is where George started, and looking at any other things that I could do, nothing ever really made sense except to do that. When I put them up against each other, I was like, well, I love kids. I could, you know, work in a daycare. I could be a teacher. I mean, there was a lot of things I could see myself doing in my life. But every time I put it up against what George and Linda were doing, it just paled in comparison, because they were, aside from the fact that they enjoyed their work, I think what affected me most was to see what they were doing in the world. And you know, the younger I was, the less I really understood that. But I could see people coming in, because they had an office out of their home. So the clients would come in to sit in our living room and wait to see them. And so I would see them come in and I would see them leave. And they were happier when they left. And he had a great relationship with them. We had a New Year's Day party every year where he would invite all of his clients, and they were just such a happy bunch. And so, you know, as I started to understand that, I started to think, well, what could be better than this? What could be more rewarding than this kind of work? And so at every choice point, I was really diligent in thinking, do I really want to do this? I want to just go into the family business because that's what people do. Do I really want to do this? And every time it was a resounding yes. And it's just kind of unfolded in a really nice, natural way. And it, you know, certainly helps that we understand this, you know, what we understand, the things that we teach clients serves us in our family relationship and in our business relationships. And it just makes it a pleasure to work with your family. And, you know, aside from the normal everyday family things that, you know, people have, we really enjoy working together, and we enjoy doing what we're doing and kind of pioneering something that can really help the world.
And you're married, and you've got kids yourself?
I am married. You'll be hearing a little bit more about that in today's episode. And I have 3 children, that are 11, 8, and 6.
So this isn't some theoretical thing we're talking about, because, like you said, this helps yourself. This is kind of live and real for you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons actually that we're so relationships has always been something that we've been interested in, and we've helped, hundreds of relationships over the years. But when we stopped and looked, like a couple of years ago, we said, okay, what do we really want to do if we were to, start fresh? And we created this online division a couple of years ago. And one of the things that was most um, that was strongest for us in terms of who do we want to be talking to, it was relationships. Because as you suggest, we have really, really seen it in our own lives. We've seen it in our marriages ourselves. We've seen it in our family relationships. I've seen it myself as a child in relationship with my parents, and as a parent in relationship to my kids. And to see the power that people have that they're just so completely unaware of in terms of creating the kinds of relationships that they want to live in, and to see how easily that can be accessed in people, and how rewarding it can be. It's absolutely at the top of our list of things that we want to contribute to the world.
Yeah, I can only just imagine. I mean, a little bit of my story is that I kind of got introduced to what you guys teach about 3 years ago, and other people that I've had on the podcast. And at the time, I felt like I had a normal relationship. You have your ups and downs with your family. And one thing that I didn't expect was just how impactful it would have been on my own relationship with my family. And I remember thinking just a few months later, after, starting my journey down this road, that my relationship with my family had gone from good to I called it Disney-like in a very, very short space of time. And I can only imagine what it must be to live with, two people who've been teaching it for decades as your parents. Um, and like you say, and I love what you said earlier on as well, that doesn't mean it, when I say Disney-like, it doesn't mean that it's always like that, because every person that I know who's been teaching this, every person that I know who's been on my podcast has said, well, of course we're normal, so we lose sight of what we're teaching, but it's about, well, actually, let me ask you. For me, I was going to say it's about recovering, but I'd love to hear your view on it, because I certainly see it's more about recovering to what's possible and the relationship we want, as opposed to always being perfect and never having an argument and never falling out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really nice way of saying it, and I think that's absolutely true. You hear the term resilience a lot in this field, in this work. People talk about being resilient and being able to get over things, and I think that's absolutely true. Being able to recover from the upset, because it is important. I think people are looking for a perfection. I think people are looking for what they think they want, what they think is possible. And I think it's really in service to tell people, look, I got a great relationship, and I got something that has helped hundreds and hundreds of couples, but it's not a system for perfection. It's a way of being in relationship that kind of brings out the richness and the value and the the I don't know, the beauty, or there's something about the essence of relationships, why anybody's even in any relationship, is because you get something out of connecting with someone else. And whether you get with, a friend and you just really enjoy their company, or you get with a, person that you get in a romantic relationship with and you get feelings of love and joy, and, you really love the connection of that, or whether it's with your kids, there is something magic in relationships that's built into us, and that because we're social creatures, in nature. Look, we're supposed to be in relationship. And the reason is because there's something in it for us. And I think that kind of seeing what that is, and seeing that what gets in the way of that when we're not in those feelings in relationships with people, when we're in feelings of discord or frustration or hurt, if our feelings get hurt, or we get, angry, or disheartened, hopeless about something, that once you start to see that that's totally normal, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's just it's not what it looks like. That's really what it is. It's not what it looks like. It looks like there's something wrong with the relationship. Usually it looks like there's something wrong with the other person.
Right.
And being able to see that's not really true. It's not really true that there's something wrong with the relationship. It's not really true that there's something wrong with the other person. Doesn't mean, something doesn't need to get addressed. But that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, actually, is that there's something that happens in our minds. Whether we're in a relationship or not, it happens in our minds. And the more we can see that happens, the more we can account for it. So I was thinking the other day that I was in a restaurant, and I was really excited to get the thing that I always get in the restaurant. Well, I got there, and of course, they didn't have it. They said, we're out of that item on the menu.
What was it? What was the item? Everyone's wondering what it was.
It was scallops.
Oh, okay.
You ever had scallops?
I don't eat that, but
fantastic scallops at this restaurant, and I was really into getting them. And of course, I got there, and they didn't have them. And I was thinking about the experience, and I realized it unnerved me. It affected, then once I looked at the rest of the menu, I was like, well, is that going to be as good as scallops? And maybe I should get something that isn't like scallops. Maybe I should get something vegetarian so that I don't compare it to it. And I just got a little bit kind of sideways about everything. And the next little bit of the evening, trying to figure out what to order, I was just a little bit sideways about it. And it completely affected my experience of everything. It affected my ability to consider. I couldn't even really see clearly. I couldn't picture putting something in my mouth and seeing whether it would taste good, because I was kind of in my head about it. And I realized that that's something that happens in relationships a lot, and it happens in our life a lot, but we just kind of overlook it. But when it happens in relationships, we don't overlook it as much as we end up kind of misunderstanding it and misattributing where it came from and what the problem is about it. And when I was thinking about this, podcast and asking myself, what is it? What kind of questions do I often get? What is it that creates problems in relationships? One of the things I was thinking about is that people get doubtful. People get thoughts about what's wrong with my relationship and should I really even be in this relationship. People get thoughts about divorce and separation and splitting up, and it freaks them out. It really freaks people out. And I realized that it doesn't freak me out as much as it freaks my clients out. So I was asking myself, well, what is that? What accounts for that? And I realized that it's really about the fact that our mind plays tricks on us in the same way that my mind played the trick on me in the restaurant. That if I hadn't gone in without an expectation of what I would have, I would have just sat down, I would have looked at the menu, everything would have looked delicious, and I naturally would have chosen what I wanted, ordered it, and gone on with my evening. But because I had an idea about what I was going to have, what the evening was going to be like, what it was going to taste like, how I was going to feel about everything, it skewed my experience of sitting at the table and ordering and enjoying my dinner. And we do that in relationships a lot. And it's a function of something that happens inside of our own mind that changes the way that we see things. And doubt and fear, insecurity about whether we're with the right person, whether they're pulling their weight, whether they're doing, whether they're going to be who we should be with. When we get doubts about that, it changes the way that we see everything. It's kind of like putting sunglasses on. And it affects, it's amazing how much it affects. It affects what we see when we look out at our future in the relationship. We see, well, do I want to be with a person that does this, and what's it going to be like if we have kids and the kids learn this? And we start really we're using our imagination is really what we're doing. That's what happens when the future only we're using our imagination in a way that tends to be darker. But it doesn't look darker to us because we didn't really notice that we put the sunglasses on. We don't notice when we get discouraged or frustrated about something. We just feel that way. We look out at the future, and the future doesn't look very good. It affects how we see the past as well. You know, we think back when you get mad at somebody, when you get your feelings hurt about somebody, and all of a sudden your head floods with all of the times they've done that before. Now, if you look closely, you notice that it rarely gets flooded with all of the times that they've done really beautiful and loving and happy things for you. That doesn't usually occur to us. Because, again, there's a distortion factor. When we get bothered, when we get upset, when we get our feelings hurt, when we get discouraged about something, when we get doubtful, it changes the way that we see things. It changes the way we see the past. It changes the way that we see the present. It changes the way that we see the future. It changes what we think could be. And as you start to see that, as you start to see that, you factor it in. You factor it in a little bit more. You know how if you stay out late one night and you just didn't get very much sleep, and maybe you had a few glasses of wine and you woke up just a little fuzzy in the morning?
Yeah.
Well, that's not a big deal. You can still get up and go to work, but it factors in. You kind of realize I have to get back on my game. I got to pull myself out of this. I have to, maybe I have to sleep in a little bit if I have the, ability to do that. You factor it in the best that you can. And whether you factor it in by kind of bringing a little bit more energy because you want to account for it and you don't want to, show up slow to work, whether you factor it in because you drink a little bit of extra water, whether you factor it in because you decide to take a little bit longer lunch or you take a nap in the afternoon, you factor it in, you realize that there's something about the way that you're feeling physically during the day that you want to account for. And that's really helpful. It's really helpful. And it's an easy adjustment. And it doesn't involve feeling bad about yourself or figuring out why you drank too much the night before. You just know that there's something that's affecting the way that you go about your day, and so you make adjustments to that.
Yeah, and that's really helpful in relationships, I see, because I use a different metaphor, but kind of similar metaphor in a way, but to the same thing. That I was talking to someone recently, a client of mine, who was talking about his relationship, and he could tell that he wasn't thinking clearly. He was overthinking things. He was up in his head. He didn't feel too great about it. And he was trying to make judgments or decisions or understand the relationship from that place. And similar, but I guess to what you were saying, the way I talk about it is, well, if you've had too much to drink, you say factor it in. I say, well, I know for me, I don't drink anymore, but when I did, I would know not to drive my car. Mm-hmm. Because I knew, not that I'm a bad driver, but I know I've had too much to drink. So it doesn't make sense to drive my car because my ability in that moment is impaired. And so what I explained to this chap was, it's the same thing when you're caught up in your head, when you're overthinking things, when you're overanalyzing things. You don't recover from being drunk by drinking more. You just leave it alone. You let yourself sober up, and when you're sober, then you can drive your car or operate heavy machinery or whatever it is that you want to do. But not to do that when you're drunk. And so what I hear you say about taking into account, it's similar sort of thing, that when we know that, and I think we all know that to a certain extent, when you're very upset at your mate or your kids or your business partner, anything, you kind of know that you're not really thinking straight.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ankush. That's a great extension of the metaphor, because that's all, it's a funny thing. It's the smallest thing what you just said and what I've been talking about is just knowing that we're impaired, knowing that what we see isn't necessarily what is. And that's the problem with drinking and driving is that,
Yeah.
you see and you're like, "Oh, I got plenty of space to stop." And then all of a sudden you run into the car in front of you, you're like, "Oh, I don't know what happened to all that space." Well, the problem is your vision is impaired when you drink. And our vision of our relationships is impaired. The vision of what's happened to us in the past, the vision of what's happened that might happen in the future, what's possible in terms of working it out in the present, all of that is impaired. And the problem is it's impaired just like drinking and driving. It's impaired in a way that you can't account for in the moment. You don't know what's true or what's right. You don't know how big of a problem things are, and you don't know how to deal with it because what you see has some degree of distortion in it. And just like drinking and driving, you really can't do anything about that until you sober up. Now, the problem is, unlike drinking and driving, unlike drinking, is that sobering up is something that, most people know, as you suggest, not to drink in order to sober up. They know if I just stop drinking and my body will take care of it.
Yeah.
My body will process the alcohol out of it, and at some point I will be sober, and I'll know what that point is because I can move my hand and there's only one hand in front of me instead of four, or however many there was when you had too much to drink. And that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about is how that metaphor actually really does extend, because if we can see that the distortion that's occurring in our thinking and in the way that we're seeing things in our relationship, if we can see that that's just a function of us in our thinking, and as you suggest, and if we don't feed that, if we don't drink more of that, if we don't keep thinking about that, which is really easy to do when it doesn't look like it's your thinking. It looks like it's the relationship. And it's even worse because not only do you think about it, but you think about it purposefully because you feel like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to really figure out what's wrong. I'm going to talk to this person until we get to the heart of it and until they acknowledge what the problem is or until they see what the problem is for me. But we're coming at it from such an impaired and distorted state that we're not listening and we're coming at them in a way that they don't want to deal with us. But we just keep going because we think that's where the answers lie. But I was reflecting on this and when you had said, tell story. People like to hear stories about yourself and about your life. I was thinking about a time that my husband and I had just had kids, and we were figuring out the ins and the outs of how to run a family and how to balance responsibilities. And I got, we were both overwhelmed and had too much going on, and I got thinking about the fact that it was out of balance in terms of how much we were each doing. And I felt like there were things that he ought to be doing legitimately. I wasn't trying to be demanding, but I really felt like, take an example of, I felt like he should be spending more quality time with the kids. I'm like, well, I'm doing homework and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And it'd be great if you could spend some more quality time with the kids, take them out and kick the soccer ball around. And so I had this idea, and I thought at the beginning, this is a fantastic idea. This would be great. This would be good for him. Get him outside. He can do something different. The kids would love it, and it would take some of the burden off of me because I feel like that's important. So I talked with him about it. Sounded good. He was all on board, but it didn't happen, because it was crazy. He didn't quite find the time. And so I talked to him about it again, and it didn't really happen. And I slowly but surely got it kind of concreted as a problem for me. I started seeing, I think this matters. I've told him I think that this matters. It's not happening. And all of a sudden it was a problem. It was something that existed. Before it was just kind of something I thought about. Maybe we should do this. That would be great. Well, slowly but surely it turned into a thing. And it went from kind of an idea to a truth. And because it seemed reasonable to me, and if you read all the parenting blogs, you see this is important. And you might talk to my friends; they seemed like to think it was important. And it just it got bigger and it got bigger, and it kind of became an obstacle in terms of what we were doing together. Because remember how I said that it distorts everything? Well, every time him and the kids would come together in my mind, I would be reminded of the fact that he could be spending quality time with them in this moment, and he's not. And not only that, but my head would get filled up with all the times that he could have done that before and he didn't. And then my head would get filled up with, well, what's going to happen to the kids if they don't have enough quality time with their parents, you see? So you get this phenomenon of something that starts with kind of like, like a seed, or like a little, kind of bit of snow. And then as the analogy goes, it snowballed into something bigger and bigger. And it became a problem, and it really compromised our ability to be close. It compromised our ability to work together because I had a little bit of an edge every time I talked with him about something to do with the kids. It compromised his ability to be however he was going to be in life because he felt this constant judgment from me. So it really did turn into something. And I didn't see it. It looked like something that was totally reasonable, and if it wasn't working out, it was really his problem. I mean, how hard is it to spend time with your kids? And isn't it only reasonable, and why doesn't he see that? So it started as an idea that was clearly a thought in my mind, and then it turned into something else. It left the thought formulation to me and turned into an issue. And it turned into an issue that was his problem and his fault. Now, that's where the trouble occurs, is when it goes from our own thinking to something outside of ourselves. That's where we get into trouble. And that's where most people get into trouble in their relationship. Now, fortunately for me, I had some idea that at some point there was a critical mass of kind of bad will on my part and frustration. And I was living in it long enough that at some point I thought to myself, this isn't good. And as much as I know about kind of how relationships work, I'm pretty sure that I have more of a part in this than I thought a minute ago. Because if I'm honest, it really does look like his fault. My feeling looks like his fault. And I know it's not. It can't be. It can't be, because that's not how it works. I create my feeling through my own thinking. Now, it looks like it's his fault. There's got to be another way of seeing it. And that in and of itself woke me up a little bit. I just got a little bit more kind of self-conscious about it, a little bit more accountable about it. But I still didn't really know what to do because I couldn't really see it any other way. I mean, it really still did look like something that was integrally important in a family. It didn't look like anything I could do because I couldn't see. The only thing I could see to do is to spend more time with the kids on my own, which wasn't really realistic because I didn't have any more time. And every time I thought of that, my head just filled with resentment. I thought, well, that's not a good solution. But the fact that I questioned whether it was really how it seemed, whether I was seeing things accurately, that helped me. It gave me just a little bit of breath of fresh air, a little bit of space in my thinking. And so for a while, I hung out and just resisting the temptation to think more into it, resisting the temptation to make more of a mess, biting my tongue when I was around him so I didn't, so that my tone didn't come out in a nasty way. And slowly but surely, the energy of it dispersed a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it stopped being so intense. And one of the things that happened when the intensity lessened about it is that I had a few new thoughts. Like every once in a while, a thought would slip in, like, he did spend time with the kids yesterday, and I'm pretty sure I didn't give him credit for that. Like, I'm pretty sure I just overlooked that. Now, that would come and go pretty quickly. That didn't change everything for me. But I started noticing a trend in the what was in my head, and the quality of what was in my head changed from a constant flood of disappointing thoughts and bad feeling to a little bit more of a neutral feeling and a few ideas of maybe things are a little different than I thought. And it just moved more in that direction. And the more open I was to seeing it differently, the more it showed up differently in my mind, the more I saw a different kind of view of the reality of it. The other thing that happened is that because there was less of a charge on it, I was able to have a conversation with him about it that was different than the conversations I'd had before. Whereas I was really able to say, now, why don't you spend more time with the kids? And I really meant it. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't like hey, how come you don't do this? It was a genuine question. And I got more of a genuine answer from him. And that changed things a little bit. So it as I started seeing the power of that distortion to create a whole picture of how bad the relationship is, as I started to see that didn't have nearly as much to do with the relationship as it had to do with me and the way I was thinking about it, it left space to think about it in a little bit of a different way. And that changed the landscape. Does that make sense, Ankush? And do you think that makes sense to your listeners?
Yeah, and what occurs to me is that the way you were being was very logical beforehand and afterwards. So before, what I hear you say is, it looked like to you that your husband not spending time with the kids was the cause of you feeling frustrated, upset, overwhelmed. And so to me, it seems like, well, if that's how it works, which we've all been there, we've all been in a place where it looks like someone else is causing us to feel a certain way, or at least has got something to do with it. Then what I see is, well, that's very logical for you to then resent that person or try and change them or nag them or act in a certain way. That again, if everyone's honest, we've all done that.
Of course.
And what I heard you say was, when you realize that it wasn't really coming from him, because that's not how our minds work, and that's what you teach your clients, just knowing that, oh, it doesn't work that way, then all of a sudden your behavior changed, because all of a sudden it wasn't logical. That's kind of what I heard you say.
Yeah. And what I want to point out too is that my behavior absolutely did change, but I think what was the bigger and the more important change for me was not so much my behavior, but what the relationship looked like, what my husband looked like changed, what the situation looked like changed. And as that changed, it got less negative, it got less intense, it got more hopeful. It gave some space for new ideas to come to mind. It just and it felt better. It felt better. It sucks to be in a relationship where when you look around everything looks bad and discouraging, and as you pointed out, everything looks like it's on you, which is often what happens to people when they get feeling like they're dissatisfied in a relationship. They can't get the other person to step up and change in the way that they think they should. So they're like, well, I guess I just have to change. I have to walk around on eggshells, or, I guess I have to do it myself. And that when we see things like that, and I think this is the biggest thing that I've ever learned in my relationships, all of my relationships, is that when things look really bad, it's got something to do with what's going on in my head. And if things didn't look that bad, no, if I wasn't thinking what I was thinking, things would look better, feel better, and actually be better. They would be better. And that's actually to one of your questions that came in is how do I keep our relationship fresh? How do I keep that kind of honeymoon phase?
Right.
Where things are really easy and things are really wonderful and, kind of everything's great. Well, the thing is that we have a natural ability to relate to our thinking in a way that doesn't take us down a path of darkness. We have a natural ability to do that. Now, it happens really organically when we're with somebody because we're just, we're so connected to who they are and we're so interested in what they're about, and it's so easy to overlook things that they do that are a problem for us. And slowly but surely, we just start buying into our thinking that those things really matter. But if you look closely, like if you look at friends, like I have a friend who's always late. She's always late for everything. And every once in a while it bothers me, but if it bothered me that much, I just wouldn't be friends with her. I got other friends, and there's, it's a legitimate reason not to be friends with somebody. But I want to be friends with her. And so I don't really think much about her being late. I just incorporate it into how I know her, and I make adjustments. And I don't really entertain frustration or irritation with her. I just don't do it. And it's not that hard for me to do. I just kind of see her in a certain way. It's a part of who she is, and it's not that big of a deal. Well, that's how we are in the beginning of relationships. We're like, oh, look, he doesn't put he doesn't put a coaster under his glass. He's so funny. He doesn't care about things. He just never, doesn't really matter to him. Isn't that sweet that he doesn't care that much? And it's a good thing I'm around. I can save the tables, and you kind of idealize how things are. We have the ability to do that in our life. All we have to do is see that the frustration that comes with it is a function of our own thinking. And as we see that, we calm down about it. And we see that there's choice, just like there's choice with our friends. I can get irritated because she's late all the time, or I can just factor it in as a part of how she is.
Whereas most normal relationships, it goes from, oh, isn't it sweet, he doesn't use the coaster, that doesn't matter to him, to some years or months down the line, it's like, oh my God, he hasn't used the coaster again. Right? It's like the same situation.
And the day that you're signing the divorce papers, you're like, it all started with the coaster. If I'd seen it then, I'd realize that he doesn't care, and it doesn't matter to him about other people's stuff. And, I should have seen it because it was back then. But the thing is that the problemness of it exists in our minds. And we can do that. The thing is that we can decide that something matters to us enough to leave a relationship. We can do that if we want to. But we should do it knowing that that's a product of our own thinking. And we know that because there are functioning relationships right now in this moment that have things that one person is completely intolerant of and another person isn't, and that's why the relationship works. So I don't know if I said that quite right, but what I mean to say is there's relationships out there where affairs are not a problem. They're not a problem. Now, an affair would be a problem in my relationship. If my husband was, involved with another woman, that would be a problem. I'd say, well, I can't have that. But the fact of the matter is, that's just my idea that I can't have it. There's somebody else out there who's like, look, it works out great. It works out just fine. It's what they got to do. And I don't really mind because I don't have as much need for intimacy. And we have got a great relationship otherwise. It's very functional. We provide something for each other in an emotional way that's really what I need. We're raising the kids together, and we've got a really nice life. And if he's got, somebody that he's involved with, that's all right with me. Now, that's not my idea. about it, and my ideas are really different than that, and therefore it would be a problem for me in my relationship, and I'm entitled to have that problem. But you can't deny that it's still just an idea that I made up or somebody else made up, and I thought, well, that sounds good. Maybe we should be monogamous. And so I got on board with that idea, and my life is determined by how much I see that as an idea and how much I see it as truth. And that's what we're faced with in our life. And people have divorced their spouses for much smaller problems than having affairs. I had a client who she said to her husband when they first met, before they even got married, she said, "You know what? I love cards. Cards are really important to me. I really like getting birthday cards, Valentine's Day cards. And so I just want you to know going in that really matters to me." So, but sure enough, he got cards in the beginning, but then he stopped getting cards for her. And pretty soon it turned into a thing about he just doesn't care. I've told him, it really matters to me. He just doesn't care. Well, do you know how many marriages have broken up based on that? Based on the idea that a person has to, express how much they care in a certain way for me to, be willing to be in relationship with them. Now, I guess one of the things I want to say is that it's not right or wrong. It's not right or wrong. It's not right or wrong that person is in relationship and infidelity is not a problem, or that somebody else is in relationship and it is a problem for them. It's not right or wrong that somebody leaves a relationship because they don't feel like the person is expressing their love for them in a way that they can take it in. It doesn't matter, but you have to see that it's all coming from our ideas about things, and the more attached we get to our ideas, the more distortion there's going to be, and the less clearly we're going to be able to see it.
So what I hear you say is, it's not about having any kind of relationship. That's not what you're pointing to, but what you're pointing to is helping ourselves see that we are creating our own ideas, and from that place having a choice, as opposed to almost feeling like you've got no choice because he doesn't use the coaster, or he didn't let me have the TV remote. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if anyone wants to find out more about Kara or Erica or George, in fact, all three, it's pranskyandAssociates.com, and I'll share the link. Kara has kindly offered the audio Desires, Wants and Needs for absolutely free to all listeners of this podcast. In order to get the audio, please visit the Pransky and Associates website. The link will be in the YouTube description and also on my website, and use the download code podcasts. This was the Relationship Series podcast with Ankush Jain. Please note, as well as listening via YouTube, you can download this and every episode to your smartphone via iTunes or Stitcher. If you like this episode, please subscribe, share it online, and leave us your feedback. Thanks for listening.